Nathan Cole spent his entire life believing that money could solve every problem. He built a billion-dollar empire and learned to see people as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Then one day, a young woman in a simple white dress walked into his office, unafraid of his power, and made him question everything he believed. If you enjoy powerful stories about love, difficult choices, and true human values, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments, could you love someone who had once lost themselves? Nathan Cole believed silence was more revealing than conversation. People lied with words. Silence stripped them down. His office had been designed by architects who called it minimalist. Nathan preferred another description, a laboratory. Everything unnecessary had been removed. Dark oak, steel, glass. A desk so immaculate it looked as though no human had ever worked there. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, reducing thousands of lives to slow-moving dots beneath polished towers. Even the air seemed filtered of emotion. Only one object ever looked out of place, a porcelain cup of tea that always went cold. His assistant replaced it every morning. Nathan almost never drank it. By noon, a thin gray film floated across the surface, a quiet reminder that time kept moving whether people noticed or not. He didn't. He measured time in acquisitions, quarterly reports, negotiations, and signatures. People called him a billionaire. He preferred efficient. Efficiency never disappointed you. People did. Another resume landed on his desk. Harvard, MBA, 5 languages, leadership awards, volunteer work. The sort of document carefully engineered by someone who had spent years polishing every imperfection until nothing human remained. Nathan flipped to the next. Almost identical. Different name. Same expensive vocabulary. Same predictable ambition. He sometimes wondered whether universities secretly printed these people from the same machine. The final resume rested beneath the stack. Clara Bennett. No elite business school. No endless list of executive positions. No exaggerated promises about changing the world before 30. The resume felt unfinished, which made it strangely more interesting than the others. Nathan pressed the intercom. "Send in Miss Bennett." The door opened quietly, not timidly. Quietly. There was a difference. Clara stepped inside wearing a simple short white dress that seemed almost absurd against the dark geometry of the office. Her long chestnut hair rested naturally over one shoulder. Thin-framed glasses softened neither her expression nor her posture. She wasn't dressed to impress. She looked like someone who had dressed for herself. Nathan noticed something else. No designer handbag, no visible luxury watch, no rehearsed smile. Most candidates entered this office already apologizing for taking up space. She simply walked toward the chair and waited. Not sitting, not speaking, just waiting. Interesting. Nathan didn't invite her to sit. He rarely did. It was one of dozens of small psychological experiments accumulated over the years. Some candidates rushed into conversation. Some laughed nervously. Some filled the silence with useless explanations. The truly insecure couldn't survive more than 15 seconds. Nathan looked back down at her resume. Deliberately. 1 second. 5. 10. 20. The office became so still he could hear the quiet hum of the climate system hidden inside the walls. Then, instead of staring at him, Clara turned toward the panoramic window. She watched the city, not with admiration, with curiosity. Nathan finally spoke. "Do you find silence uncomfortable?" She turned back calmly. "No. Most people do. I noticed. And yet you haven't said anything." There wasn't anything to answer. Nathan leaned back slightly. "You don't seem particularly interested in getting this job." She tilted her head almost imperceptibly. "Or maybe you're waiting for me to perform." The corner of his mouth nearly moved. Nearly. "So what am I doing?" She answered without hesitation. You're not reading my resume anymore." Nathan remained silent. She continued, "You're checking how long it'll take before I become uncomfortable." The sentence landed with surgical precision. No accusation, no irritation, just observation. For the first time that morning, Nathan looked at her, not the resume, not the employment history, her. A microscopic crack appeared somewhere inside the perfectly engineered machinery of his expectations, almost invisible, but real. Most applicants reacted, she analyzed. That was considerably more dangerous. "Sit down." She did. No sigh of relief. No victorious smile. Just calm. Nathan folded his hands. "Your previous employer says you resigned voluntarily." "I did." "Why?" "Our definitions of honesty became incompatible." "What does that mean?" "It means neither of us was willing to pretend." "You enjoy vague answers?" "I enjoy accurate ones." Nathan stared at her. "So you left without another position secured?" "Yes." "Financially irresponsible?" "Possibly." "You don't seem worried." "I've already lived through things that were far more expensive than unemployment." That sentence lingered in the room. Nathan noticed it. She noticed that he noticed. Neither explained it. Inside Clara's mind, however, another image surfaced without permission. A hospital corridor. Rain against the windows. A man trying to smile despite knowing he had lost everything. Paperwork signed by people who had called betrayal business strategy. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had come. Not today. Those doors would remain closed. Nathan interrupted the silence. "You have qualifications beyond this position." "I know." "So why apply to become someone's assistant?" "Because titles tell me very little about people." "And this position does?" "It gives me a front row seat." Nathan almost laughed. Almost. "You understand who you're speaking to?" "I read your company profile." "That's not what I asked." "No." She looked directly into his eyes. "I understand I'm speaking to a man. Not a billionaire. Not an empire. Not a reputation. A man." Oddly enough, that answer irritated him more than flattery ever could. Nathan stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched beneath him like a balance sheet waiting to be optimized. He had spent nearly 2 decades believing every problem could be solved through enough discipline, enough money, enough control. The formula had worked astonishingly well, except for the part no spreadsheet could calculate. Why success kept becoming quieter. Why victories lasted less each year. Why every office grew larger, while every evening somehow became smaller. He pushed the thought away. Sentiment was an inefficient habit. He turned back. "One final question." Clara waited. "If I offered you twice the salary somewhere else tomorrow, would you leave?" "No." "Why not?" "Because salary isn't what makes people stay." "What does?" She answered so simply it almost sounded impolite. "The kind of person they're working for." Nathan folded his arms. "And what if that person happens to be difficult?" "Everyone is difficult." She paused. "The interesting question is whether they're worth the difficulty." Silence settled again. This time Nathan hadn't created it. He looked once more at the resume lying on his desk. The paper suddenly felt almost irrelevant. Numbers, certificates, employment dates. None of them explained the woman sitting in front of him. He disliked mysteries, yet this one refused to leave. "So," he said quietly, "what's your opinion of money?" Clara smiled for the first time, not warmly, knowingly. "Money is an excellent employee." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "But a terrible manager." He waited. She continued. "It can count. It can calculate. It can purchase. But it has no idea how to decide who deserves trust." The room became impossibly still. Somewhere beyond the glass, helicopters crossed the skyline. Phones rang in distant offices. Traffic flowed through the streets below. Inside Nathan's office, none of it existed. He studied Clara for several long seconds. Everything about her contradicted the rules he had trusted for years, which meant one of two things. Either she was extraordinarily naive, or she understood something he had spent a lifetime overlooking. Nathan reached for the contract. "You start Monday." No congratulations, no handshake, no theatrical conclusion. Clara simply nodded. "I'll be here." She left the office as quietly as she had entered it. The door closed. Nathan remained standing beside the window, the unsigned resumes still scattered across his desk. For reasons he couldn't explain, the room no longer felt quite as silent. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit. He was thinking about a woman who hadn't tried to impress him even once. That unsettled him far more than any business rival ever had. Nathan Cole had always believed pressure was the quickest way to discover who people really were. Gold survived fire. Everything else melted. By the end of Clara Bennett's first week, he quietly doubled her workload. By the second, he made sure every meeting that should have ended before sunset somehow drifted into the evening. By the third, he had developed an almost scientific curiosity. How long before she became like the others? The answer kept refusing to arrive. She never complained, never rushed, never played the exhausted martyr hoping someone would notice. She simply moved through each day with the calm rhythm of someone who understood that panic rarely solved anything worth solving. Nathan kept waiting for the crack. Instead, something else began cracking. His routines. Monday morning. His calendar looked less like a schedule than a declaration of war. 8 meetings, 3 negotiations, a board presentation, 2 investor calls, 1 legal dispute. Lunch had disappeared from the calendar entirely. Nathan didn't notice. Clara did. At exactly 1:15, she stepped into his office carrying a plain ceramic plate. Grilled salmon, vegetables, nothing extravagant, nothing photogenic. "Food. I'm busy." "I know." "Take it away." She placed it beside his keyboard anyway. "You have 12 minutes before your next meeting." "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since yesterday evening." Nathan looked up. "You've been monitoring me?" "I've been scheduling you." "There's a difference." "No." She adjusted a stack of contracts. "There's only a consequence." Nathan frowned. "If you collapse during the investor presentation, nobody wins." "I don't collapse." "No." She gave him the faintest hint of a smile. "You postpone it." Then she walked out. The door clicked shut. Nathan stared at the untouched plate. 5 minutes later, without quite realizing when he had decided to do it, he picked up the fork. Weeks passed. The office remained just as demanding. Nathan remained just as difficult. Yet something subtle had begun changing. Not inside the company. Inside him. Clara never tried to soften his personality. She interrupted its worst habits. If he attempted to schedule 3 meetings in the same hour, she quietly moved 1. If he forgot to call his mother on her birthday, a date buried somewhere beneath financial forecasts, his phone mysteriously reminded him. If he walked into work after another sleepless night, fresh coffee appeared before he asked. Never dramatically, never with a speech, simply because someone should have done it. Nathan found the habit strangely irritating and strangely comforting. The confrontation happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which, Nathan would later realize, was exactly how important moments preferred to arrive. A junior analyst had made an expensive mistake. Nothing catastrophic. Correctable. Nathan didn't see correction. He saw failure. The conference room fell silent as his voice cut across the polished table. "You had one responsibility." The young analyst lowered his eyes. "I understand." "No," Nathan replied coldly. "You clearly don't." No one moved. No one breathed louder than necessary. Fear had become part of the company's architecture. After the meeting, Clara waited until the hallway emptied. Then she spoke, quietly. May I ask you something? Nathan kept walking. You usually do. She matched his pace. Were you trying to solve the problem? She paused. Or were you making sure everyone stayed afraid of you? Nathan stopped. The corridor suddenly seemed much longer than before. He turned slowly. What did you say? I asked a question. His jaw tightened. Fear maintains standards. For a while. And afterward? People stop bringing you solutions. She looked directly at him. They only bring you excuses. Nathan said nothing, partly because he was angry, partly because he couldn't immediately prove she was wrong. That irritated him even more. Clara noticed people Nathan had spent years walking past. Mr. Henderson, the elderly security guard who quietly rubbed his shoulder every afternoon when he thought nobody was watching. One morning, she left a heating patch on his desk with no note attached. He looked around for 20 minutes, trying to discover who had done it. Mrs. Alvarez from the cleaning staff. She always arrived before sunrise, always left after sunset. Her smile had become automatic years ago. One evening, Clara found her sitting alone in the supply room, staring at an unopened container of yogurt. You haven't eaten? Mrs. Alvarez laughed softly. I forgot. The two of them shared dinner sitting on overturned cleaning buckets. No photographs, no audience, just conversation. Then there was Ethan, the newest intern, 22 years old, brilliant, terrified. He apologized before answering every question, as though breathing required permission. When Nathan rejected one of his reports, Ethan quietly deleted the entire project and began rewriting it from scratch. Clara stopped him. You made one mistake. I disappointed him. No. She slid the deleted file back onto his screen. You disappointed yourself. That's survivable. Nathan happened to pass the open office at that exact moment. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. An odd feeling settled somewhere beneath his ribs. He knew these people by employee numbers. She knew which one skipped lunch, which one limped slightly after climbing stairs, which one smiled differently on Fridays because his daughter came home from college. How had he never noticed? Or perhaps, how had he taught himself not to? Late Thursday evening, the city disappeared beneath rain. Not ordinary rain. The kind that erased skylines and turned streets into mirrors. Most employees had already gone home. Nathan and Clara left the building together after another 14-hour day. Neither spoke. The parking lot shimmered beneath sheets of water. Then, a loud crash. A delivery courier had slipped while rushing toward the loading entrance. Cardboard boxes burst open across the asphalt. Folders, medicine, children's books, groceries, everything scattered into rivers flowing toward the drains. Cars continued passing. Umbrellas continued moving. People glanced and kept walking. The courier tried gathering everything at once. His hands shook. Rain blurred his vision. Before Nathan had fully processed what was happening, Clara had already moved. She set her umbrella aside, dropped to one knee, then both. The white fabric of her dress darkened immediately against the soaked pavement. She caught a box before the current carried it away, stacked another, picked fruit from a puddle, collected scattered envelopes one by one as though each belonged to someone she loved. The courier kept apologizing. She smiled. You don't need to apologize. We'll lose less time if we stop talking. Nathan remained standing beneath the building's entrance, watching. A sensible part of his mind whispered that this wasn't his responsibility. Someone else would help. Security, maintenance, anyone. Yet no one moved. His shoes were expensive. His suit had been tailored in Milan. His schedule remained painfully full. None of those facts suddenly felt important. Without allowing himself enough time to reconsider, Nathan walked into the rain. Cold water soaked through his jacket within seconds. He crouched beside Clara. Neither acknowledged the absurdity of the moment. He simply picked up another box, then another. The courier stared at him, Recognition slowly spread across the young man's face. "Aren't you?" Nathan interrupted gently. "Hand me the tape." No speeches, no cameras, only rain. For several minutes, the billionaire and his assistant knelt together on wet asphalt while the storm continued falling around them. The city carried on without noticing, yet something almost invisible had shifted. Not outside, inside. The next morning, Nathan entered his office expecting another avalanche of financial reports. Instead, Clara placed a tablet on his desk. A local news article filled the screen. Billionaire CEO helps courier during downtown storm. Someone had photographed them from across the street. Nathan, suit soaked through, on one knee, holding a damaged cardboard box. Clara beside him, rain clinging to loose strands of chestnut hair as she smiled at the embarrassed courier. The article praised generosity. Social media called it refreshing. His communications department immediately suggested issuing a public statement. Nathan closed the tablet. No. They're asking whether this was a company campaign. It wasn't. They'll keep calling. Let them. For several moments, he remained alone after Clara left the office. He expected embarrassment, damage control, annoyance. Instead, something unexpectedly simple settled over him. Lightness, the strange, almost forgotten sensation that came after doing something without calculating its return. No contracts, no publicity, no strategy. Just the quiet certainty that, for 10 ordinary minutes in the rain, he had behaved like the version of himself he hadn't met in years. Later that afternoon, Clara entered with another stack of documents. She placed them on his desk. He looked up. She looked back. Neither mentioned the photograph. Neither mentioned the rain. Neither needed to. Silence filled the room once again, but it no longer belonged to power. It belonged to understanding. And Nathan realized something that unsettled him far more than any hostile takeover ever could. For the first time in years, there was someone whose silence he preferred over almost everyone else's words. Disasters never announced themselves. They entered quietly. One ordinary email, one missing file, one notification that looked no different from 100 others. At 8:17 on a gray Tuesday morning, Nathan Cole's phone vibrated. Then it vibrated again, and again. By 8:30, every major financial outlet was carrying the same headline: "Confidential documents from Cole Capital leak online." Within an hour, the company's stock had begun to fall. By noon, shareholders were demanding answers. By 1 o'clock, the board of directors had gathered in the executive conference room, where panic wore tailored suits and expensive watches. No one raised their voice. People who controlled billions rarely needed to. Their calm was colder than shouting. Nathan stood at the head of the table while legal advisors projected leaked documents onto the screen. Acquisition plans, private negotiations, internal financial models, some genuine, some altered just enough to create chaos. One of the directors leaned forward. "We have a leak." Another answered before Nathan could. "No. We have someone on the inside." Silence followed. Then a third voice quietly spoke the name no one had wanted to say first. "Clara Bennett." The room didn't react. It simply accepted the suggestion the way dry wood accepts a spark. New employee, full executive access, present during confidential meetings. Every fact fit neatly into place. Too neatly. Nathan remained expressionless. Inside, something tightened. Not because the accusation sounded impossible, because it sounded possible enough to hurt. Trust was a dangerous investment. He knew that better than anyone. One director slid a prepared termination document across the table. "We remove her immediately. Freeze her accounts. Contact federal investigators. Control the narrative before the media does." Nathan looked at the unsigned paper. His hand didn't move. Someone noticed. "You disagree?" Nathan answered carefully. "I disagree with conclusions reached faster than evidence." Another director sighed. You hired her. And if we're wrong? No one answered, because no one in that room cared about being wrong, only about being first. Clara's office had already been sealed when Nathan arrived. Security officers stood outside the door. Her computer had been disconnected, her access card deactivated. Her desk looked strangely untouched. A notebook, a fountain pen, reading glasses folded neatly beside a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Nathan slowly walked around the room. Everything looked exactly as it had the evening before. Too exactly. Professionals who betrayed people usually left behind small traces of panic, missing objects, rushed mistakes, invisible fingerprints. Clara had left nothing. He opened the digital access logs himself. Hours, passwords, downloads, transfers. One entry caught his attention. A confidential file had supposedly been copied late on a Sunday evening. Nathan frowned. Sunday. The building had been closed. He checked the employee records. Clara hadn't even started working at Coal Capital until Tuesday. He stared at the date again, then once more. The room suddenly felt much colder. Someone had built the evidence, but whoever had done it hadn't expected anyone to read carefully. Nathan smiled without humor. The first real clue had appeared because someone had been too confident. By evening, he wasn't investigating Clara anymore. He was investigating the past, old court records, archived business acquisitions, companies that no longer existed except in legal databases. One name surfaced repeatedly: Bennett Construction, small family-owned business, 32 employees, excellent reputation, bankrupt 12 years earlier. Nathan remembered it vaguely, not because of the company, because of the man who had acquired its remaining assets. Victor Ashcroft, Nathan's former mentor, the man who had taught him everything about negotiations, everything except where negotiation ended and cruelty began. Nathan opened another file, internal correspondence, confidential, never intended for public eyes. Ashcroft had deliberately manipulated supplier contracts, created artificial debt, forced bankruptcy, purchased the company for less than the value of its equipment. Perfectly legal, perfectly devastating. Nathan leaned back slowly, his stomach turned. He remembered congratulating Ashcroft after that acquisition. He had called it brilliant. He had never asked who had been standing on the other side of the contract. Another document appeared. Hospital records. Richard Bennett. Heart failure. 3 months after losing the company. Nathan closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the numbers had acquired faces. He found Clara late that evening in a quiet public library, not hiding, reading. She looked up before he spoke. I know about your father. She remained silent. I know about Ashcroft. Still nothing. Nathan sat across from her. You came here because of me. No. She finally closed the book. I came because of what your company represented. Explain. She looked out the rain-covered window. When my father lost everything. Her voice remained calm, almost too calm. People told him not to take it personally. They said, business is business. She gave a faint smile that carried no joy. It's remarkable how often people use that sentence when they're explaining why someone else's life had to be destroyed. Nathan said nothing. My father didn't die because he lost a company. She continued quietly. He died believing kindness had become a disadvantage. The words settled between them, heavy, patient. I spent years asking myself one question. She looked back at Nathan. Are all successful people built the same way? Did you come here to expose me? No. To punish me? No. Then why? To find out whether there was still someone inside the building who remembered that profits are created by people. She paused. Not instead of them. Nathan lowered his eyes. And? Clara answered honestly. I hadn't decided yet. The attack came the following night. It wasn't random. It was planned. The company's remaining evidence against the competitors had been moved to an off-site archive, while investigators worked to identify the real source of the leak. Only a handful of executives knew the location. Clara was there because she insisted on organizing the recovered files herself. Nathan had stayed behind at headquarters. At 10:43 p.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. A frightened voice interrupted before he could speak. "They're here." Glass shattered. Someone shouted. The line filled with static. Then, Clara's voice. "Nathan." The call ended. For exactly 3 seconds, Nathan remained perfectly still. His legal team rushed toward him. "The evidence. We have to secure the archive. If those files disappear..." His chief financial officer grabbed his arm. "The company could lose everything." Nathan looked toward the elevator, toward the conference room, toward the flashing messages filling his phone. Billions of dollars, shareholders, contracts, court cases, years of work. Then another thought arrived. Simple, terrifying. What if she's alone? The realization struck with almost physical force. For years, he had measured value in numbers, stock prices, revenue, growth. Yet none of those figures answered the only question that suddenly mattered. What if I reach the archive too late? Nathan pulled his arm free. "Handle the documents." "What?" "The company has lawyers." He was already moving. "It has insurance." The elevator doors opened. "Nathan!" He didn't stop. "But Clara..." His voice disappeared into the closing doors. "Doesn't have anyone else." Rain hammered the highway as if trying to erase it. Nathan drove faster than he ever had, not because he believed speed solved fear, because standing still suddenly seemed impossible. He wasn't thinking about investors. He wasn't thinking about headlines. He wasn't even thinking about winning. Only one image repeated itself. Clara alone inside that warehouse. When he arrived, police sirens already painted the walls blue and red. One of the intruders had been arrested. Another had escaped. Inside, overturned shelves littered the floor. Boxes had burst open. Documents floated through puddles formed by broken sprinkler pipes. Near the far wall, Clara, conscious, shaken, a deep cut across her forehead. She tried standing, failed. Nathan reached her before anyone else. She looked up. "You came." 3 ordinary words, yet Nathan heard something inside himself breaking open. Not dramatically, quietly, like ice finally admitting spring had arrived. Several hours later, the hospital corridor stretched endlessly beneath harsh, fluorescent lights. The walls were white enough to feel indifferent. Machines beeped somewhere beyond closed doors. Coffee from a vending machine tasted like warm cardboard. Nathan sat alone, hands clasped, jacket stained with rain and dust. For the first time in decades, there was nothing to negotiate, nothing to purchase, nothing to control, only waiting. He looked through the small window in Clara's hospital room. She was asleep, alive. That single fact outweighed every contract he had ever signed. Nathan slowly leaned back against the cold wall. An uncomfortable truth finally reached him. He had spent 20 years constructing an empire so large that people admired it from magazine covers. Yet every floor of that empire echoed. Business partners, lawyers, executives, investors, thousands of names. Not one person whose absence had ever frightened him. Not one person for whom he would have traded everything without calculation. Until Clara. The realization did not make him feel powerful. It made him feel painfully human. And for the first time in his life, that frightened him more than losing his fortune ever could. The newspapers called it a victory. The courts called it justice. The shareholders called it damage control. Nathan Cole called it a beginning. Victor Ashcroft's carefully constructed empire collapsed under the weight of evidence that had finally found daylight. Competitors who had orchestrated the leak faced criminal charges. The company's reputation recovered faster than analysts had predicted. People congratulated Nathan. He accepted none of it, because he knew something no financial report could explain. The greatest change had never appeared on a balance sheet. It had happened quietly, inside a man who had spent half his life confusing control with strength. The first decision surprised everyone. Nathan established an employee foundation, funded from his own personal fortune. Not a publicity campaign, not a tax strategy. A permanent fund for workers facing illness, family emergencies, education expenses, or unexpected hardship. Applications required no speeches, no humiliation, no desperate explanations, only the simple acknowledgement that sometimes life became heavier than one person could carry. The board objected immediately. "This isn't how corporations operate." Nathan nodded. "I know. You're setting a dangerous precedent." "I hope so." Another director leaned forward. "You're becoming emotional." Nathan smiled. "No. I'm becoming responsible." The second decision shocked Wall Street even more. Nathan withdrew from 3 highly profitable acquisitions, legally flawless, morally rotten, the kind of deals he once would have celebrated. His chief financial officer stared at the paperwork. "We're walking away from hundreds of millions." "Yes. Your competitors will take them." "Probably. They'll call you weak." Nathan signed the final page. "They've confused restraint with weakness for a very long time." He placed the pen down. "I used to make the same mistake." Word spread quickly. Some investors quietly sold their shares. Financial magazines questioned whether Nathan Cole had lost his edge. He read every article, then closed each one without irritation. It was strange. For years he had built his life around winning every argument. Now he no longer felt the need to explain himself. Freedom, he discovered, was surprisingly quiet. Clara recovered completely, physically. The rest required more complicated medicine. She returned to work 3 weeks later. Nothing seemed different. Everything was. People spoke to Nathan differently. He listened longer. Meetings ended earlier. The office no longer resembled an operating room where ambition had replaced oxygen. Someone laughed in the hallway one afternoon. No one apologized. Still, Clara knew her time there had ended, not because she no longer cared, because she cared too much. Love built on gratitude eventually became a debt. She refused to let that happen. She knocked once before entering Nathan's office, the same office where months earlier silence had been used as a weapon. Now it simply existed, peacefully. Nathan looked up. She placed a single envelope on his desk. He already knew what it contained. "I hoped you might change your mind." "I know." He opened the letter anyway. Formal resignation, 30 days notice, professional, simple, final. Nathan folded it carefully. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Outside, evening sunlight rested across the city in warm shades of gold. The office looked less like a fortress than it once had. Perhaps buildings reflected the people inside them. Nathan finally broke the silence. "I used to believe," he searched for the right words, "that a successful person was someone who could afford anything." His voice remained steady. "I was wrong." Clara waited. Nathan looked toward the window. "Success isn't having access to everything. It's knowing what should never be purchased." He smiled faintly. "Peace, trust, time, and another person's heart." Clara lowered her eyes for just a second, then looked back at him. "I'm glad you discovered that." "So am I." She took a slow breath. "But if I stay," she glanced around the office, "I'll always wonder whether I'm here because you need an assistant." Her voice softened. "Or because you feel you owe me something." Nathan opened his mouth. She gently stopped him with a small movement of her hand. "And you'll spend years wondering whether I stayed because I loved you." She smiled sadly. Or because I couldn't leave the man who saved my life? Another silence settled between them. This one hurt, because it was true. Nathan nodded almost imperceptibly. You deserve certainty. So do you. She picked up her bag, walked toward the door, stopped without turning around. Thank you. A brief pause. For proving my father was wrong. Nathan frowned. She looked back over her shoulder. He believed kindness couldn't survive success. Her eyes carried the calm certainty they had possessed on the day they first met. You proved it can. Then she left. The door closed quietly. Nathan remained alone. For the first time, loneliness no longer felt like an empty room. It felt like loving someone enough not to ask them to stay before the right time. Autumn replaced summer. Then winter arrived. Life continued with its quiet determination. Nathan discovered routines he had never noticed before. He walked instead of always being driven. He learned the names of the barista who prepared his coffee each morning. He called his mother every Sunday without reminders. Sometimes he left work before sunset, simply to watch the city become something other than an office viewed through glass. He even developed the unusual habit of entering places with no business purpose whatsoever. Museums, public parks, neighborhood cafes, small bookstores. The younger version of Nathan would have called such afternoons inefficient. The older one finally understood they were the reason efficiency existed in the first place. Meanwhile, Clara accepted a position with a non-profit organization that helped struggling family-owned businesses rebuild after financial collapse. It paid considerably less. She slept considerably better. Sometimes she thought about Nathan, not with regret, with hope. Hope, unlike nostalgia, always looked forward. It happened on an ordinary Saturday. No dramatic music, no miraculous coincidence, just weather cold enough to encourage people inside. Nathan stepped into a small, independent bookstore while escaping a sudden rain shower. The shop smelled of paper, cedar shelves, and fresh coffee. It was impossibly quiet. He smiled to himself. Months earlier, he would never have entered. He wandered without purpose until he reached the history section. Someone standing on the opposite side of the shelf reached for the very same book. Their hands stopped, then slowly withdrew. Nathan looked up. Clara. Her hair was slightly longer. The familiar glasses rested lightly against her face. She wore a simple cream-colored coat. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Not because they didn't know what to say, because neither wanted to rush the moment. Clara smiled first, not the polite smile she once reserved for professional meetings. A real one. Small, warm, uncomplicated. Nathan laughed quietly. I suppose silence still works. She smiled wider. Only when neither person is trying to win. He held up the book. You can take it. What if we read it after coffee instead? He looked at her for a moment. There was no office, no contracts, no hierarchy, no resignation letter lying between them. Only two people who had met each other twice. The first time through fear, the second through choice. I'd like that. They walked toward the little cafe inside the bookstore. Not side by side because fate had guaranteed anything. Side by side because this time, neither was pretending to be someone else. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, neither of them hurried. Some conversations deserved to begin only after life had taught both people how to listen. People often spend years believing wealth is measured by what fits inside a bank account. Then life quietly asks a different question. Who would still choose to walk beside you if every number disappeared tomorrow? Money can build towers, purchase companies, and open doors that remain closed to most people. But it has never learned how to earn trust. It has never convinced a lonely heart to stay. It has never replaced the warmth of a hand reached out without calculation. Nathan spent years mastering the mathematics of success. Clara reminded him that the most important things in life refuse to be counted, because love does not arrive when a person owns everything. It arrives much later. When they finally stop measuring the world by numbers and begin recognizing the quiet, irreplaceable value of living hearts.